My son shouted, "You live in this hole because you're a beggar." But he didn't recognize the woman sitting beside the governor was me. "She lives in that hole because she's a beggar." That's what my own son shouted. Right in the middle of my grandson's birthday party, in front of dozens of people. I stood there, still holding a paper plate I hadn't even touched, looking at him. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer a mother in his eyes. I once sold my house to save him from bankruptcy. Took care of both grandkids while his wife was in the hospital. But just one sentence. That's all it took to erase me. Not because it hurt, but because, from that second on, I understood. It was time I started living for myself. My name is Clarice Ashford, 74 years old, widowed for 20, used to be a librarian at the Glen Ridge City Library. If you've ever thought a woman my age should just sit quietly, sip tea, knit scarves, and wait for the grandkids to visit, then I ask you to pause, just for a few minutes, and listen to my story. I'm not here to complain. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just want to share something that might wake someone up out there before they lose themselves the way I once did. Because some wounds you can't see, but they quietly eat away at your dignity, bit by bit, piece by piece. And then one day, when you're treated like you're invisible, you'll understand why I walked away from that hole. And for me, that day was my grandson's birthday. A day that should have brought the family together. But instead, it was the day my son exposed me in front of everyone. They say a grandchild's birthday is a time for family to come together. But I never imagined it would be the day my own son humiliated me in front of everyone. The aluminum tray in my hands was still warm as I stepped across the damp grass and placed it on the long table set up in the backyard. Inside was a dish of baked potatoes. I'd gotten up at 5 in the morning to make it. I looked around. The smell of barbecue mixed with the scent of dry autumn leaves. Old country music hummed from a green speaker. Songs I used to hear back when I worked at the Glen Ridge Library. But somehow, everything felt distant today. Melinda didn't meet my eyes as she said, "Mom, Clarice, just take a seat and relax. We've got it from here." Her voice was sweet, almost flawless. But her eyes never invited me to join the table. There was no seat for me. No one called me over to the circle of laughter by the beer cooler. I quietly sat down on a wooden chair by the fence. No one used it. No one noticed how weathered and forgotten it was. Lila and Jake were running around with birthday balloons. Nathan stood by the grill in a tight polo shirt, beer can in hand, laughing as he told stories to a group of friends. I recognized a few faces from his high school days. They used to eat dinner in my little red brick house when Nathan brought them over for study groups. Now, not one of them looked my way. Not one word, not even a hello. I used to live in that red brick house on Elm Street, the one with the maple tree that shed golden leaves each fall. I sold it, moved into a trailer by the edge of the woods, just to save Nathan from bankruptcy, so he could have a fresh start. I still remember what he said when he signed the papers. "You're the only one who believes in me, Mom." I won't forget this. I believed him, blindly. Melinda came back, handed me a soda, already opened. "Your favorite," she said, then turned away before I could say thank you. I took a sip. Flat. The sky turned gray. Autumn clouds stretched across the sky, like deep wrinkles on my forehead. Beer cans popped open one after another. They started eating. Charred burgers passed out from the tray. Hot potatoes. Soda poured from a cooler. No one asked if I was hungry. I just sat there, listening to the laughter rise behind me, feeling like the wall they were leaning on. I looked at Nathan. He was saying something, laughing loud. I couldn't hear the words, but I remembered everything. The nights I rocked him through fevers, the times I shielded him from bullies, the tears I swallowed when he chose Melinda over finishing school. I remembered every little thing, but now he remembered none of it. Eventually, I stood and walked to the table, picked up a paper plate, took the smallest burger and a few slices of cucumber. I was just about to turn back when Nathan looked over, squinted, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, you still haven't canceled that credit card I borrowed last month." I froze. At first, I didn't understand why he brought that up. Then I did. People were watching. Beer cans paused mid-air. Melinda's eyes flicked to me, then quickly away, like I was a stain on her white dress. I lowered my voice, trying to stay calm. "I just wanted to remind you, there were a few odd charges. I thought maybe it's safer to lock the card." Nathan scoffed. "So now you think I'm stealing from you?" His voice got louder, clearer. "You live in that broken-down trailer because you chose to. No one forced you. And now you're asking for a few bucks back from some credit card? You live in that hole because you're a beggar. You get that, Mom?" Silence. The entire backyard fell quiet. I stood there, still holding that flimsy plate. The burger slipped off and hit the ground. I didn't even notice. I caught the eyes of a stranger, one of Nathan's friends. He looked down immediately. A woman let out an awkward laugh, made an excuse to refill her drink. Only Melinda stayed composed. She glanced at me again, the same way the library managers used to glance at janitors who mopped too close to closing time. I said nothing, didn't argue. I simply turned around, walked out of the yard, across the grass. The wind slipped through my collar. Country music still played behind me. Cheerful tunes that felt like a cruel joke now. No one called me back, not a single voice. Back at the trailer, I opened the creaky wooden door and turned on the light. A soft, yellow glow spilled over the old carpet and the armchair where I used to sit and knit. A squirrel darted past the window. I stood in the middle of my small room, looked around. A crooked black and white wedding photo on the wall. A few baby pictures of Lila and Jake clung to the mini fridge with tired magnets. I stepped closer, not out of anger, but because I realized I'd vanished from those pictures long ago. I just hadn't noticed. I opened the bottom drawer beneath the sink. Inside was an old wooden box, corners worn, metal latch rusted. It held things no one had asked about in 20 years. Photos, handwritten letters, little keepsakes. The only things I took with me after selling the red brick house on Walnut Hill in 2015. I told Nathan I was fine moving to the trailer. Said I'd be happy as long as they got through the financial storm. Back then, Melinda had just given birth to twins. Nathan had lost his job. Student loans were strangling them. I gently pulled out the photos, wrapped them in old newspaper, quietly, like someone burying herself. A picture of me holding baby Nathan, back when I was 30. Thick hair, eyes full of hope. Another of his high school graduation. Me holding a bouquet. Him smiling shyly. Thanksgiving photos, when Melinda first joined the family. I was the one who cooked the turkey, made cranberry sauce, set the table. I used to believe that if I loved hard enough, the family would stay whole. But love, when unacknowledged, is just another form of self-neglect. I thought of Melinda's eyes earlier. Not hateful, just indifferent. The look of someone who knows they hold the power and doesn't even need to say it. Maybe, to her, I no longer had anything worth respecting. No house, no pension, no role beyond babysitting and being a burden. I flipped open an old letter Nathan wrote in 2007 when he was in business school in Pittsburgh. "Mom, thank you for paying my tuition. I promise I won't let you down." I'd kept that letter for 16 years. Now, reading it again, those promises felt like dust. It was dark now. I made a cup of tea, poured it into a chipped mug, and turned on the radio. An old jazz song came on. Soft, aching saxophone. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, making the trailer shiver gently. I sat there, by my little wooden table, watching the boxed-up photos, a life wrapped in silence. But I had hit bottom, and the thing about rock bottom is, it's the only place solid enough to push yourself up from. That's when I realized silence isn't the end. It's the beginning of something else. Quieter, but stronger. Because once you've touched bottom, it's the one place you can push from to rise again. And that very night, I decided I'd push back, hard.
At dawn the next morning, before the sun even rose, I left the trailer. No one saw me go. No one knew where I was headed. I left the trailer before dawn. No goodbyes. No one knew where I was going. The early wind stung my face, carrying the scent of dry pine and dust. The fabric bag on my shoulder rustled softly with every step as I walked the dirt path leading to the Glenridge bus stop. I didn't bring much, just a few changes of clothes, some cash, a small box of old photographs, and one single card from 1989. Its color had faded to yellow, printed with the emblem of a volunteer program I joined when I was young.
It was the last thing that made me feel I'd once been useful, beyond just being a mother. Glenridge at 5:30 in the morning was deserted. The bus stop
Looked forgotten. Warped metal bench, flickering schedule screen. I sat down, my back aching from another sleepless night. The sky was still dark, but I could feel pale blue-gray slowly seeping across the horizon. A delivery truck rumbled past, its wheels squeaking, leaving a faint trail of dust behind. I pulled out the newspaper I'd stuffed into my coat pocket, the only one I picked up from the corner store the night before. The headline was about rising interest rates and housing issues on the East Side. I didn't care about those lines anymore. What I was looking for was silence in my mind. And maybe, just maybe, a reason to believe there was still something ahead of me. I boarded bus 7, heading downtown, toward the city library, the place I worked for nearly 2 decades, where the scent of books and paper dust made me feel real. I took my old seat by the west window, a worn magazine in hand. My fingers trembled as I flipped the pages, until I stopped at a photo of a church charity event at Trinity. I used to serve porridge there every weekend. I squinted at a curly-haired woman in the corner of the photo. "I thought that was you." I looked up, startled. Standing before me was a woman in her 50s, shoulder-length curls, plum-colored knit coat, holding a thick folder. "I'm Darla Mitchell. You used to serve soup at Trinity, didn't you?" I blinked, then nodded. "You remember? You showed me how to fold the lid just right so the soup stayed hot," she smiled. And her smile didn't feel intrusive. It felt warm, genuine. I closed the magazine. "So you remember that. Not just remember." She pulled out a chair across from me.
I manage a foundation, the Carlin Trust. We're expanding a new project for seniors, and I thought maybe you'd be interested. I looked at her, cautious and skeptical, but her eyes, there was no agenda there. We're hiring community advisors, people who've truly lived, people who know what it feels like to be forgotten, and who understand what it takes to make someone feel like they still matter. She paused. "I don't need a specialist. I need you, Ms. Clarice." I didn't answer right away, but inside, something cracked. Just a thin fracture in the ice I'd buried myself under for nearly a decade. Darla called over a social worker to fill out a simple form, then drove me in her silver SUV. Along the way, she told me about Carlin Reserve, a renovated cluster of cottages for single seniors, with community rooms, an outdoor chess patio, open libraries, and a shared kitchen. "Not a nursing home," she emphasized. "It's a place where people who thought they were forgotten get to feel useful again." I held my fabric bag tightly on my lap. Every curve in the road brought back a piece of my life. The years I worked at the library, the days Nathan learned to read, and I taught him how to use the Dewey Decimal Index, the nights I rubbed Melinda's back during her pregnancy, while Nathan worked graveyard shifts. Carlin Reserve came into view just before noon. Wooden cottages with sloped roofs, leaves scattered across the porches. A chessboard table sat in the front yard. An old man hunched over the paper, not noticing anyone. Darla stepped out first, waved me over. "The corner one's yours. 30-day trial. If it's not the right fit, you move on. No strings." I stepped into the wooden cottage. The scent of pine and cinnamon lingered, a smell like memory. There was a small dining table with a rust-red tablecloth, a cushioned chair by the window, a stone fireplace. On the table sat a mug of black coffee. No sugar. No one had to say it,
but I knew someone had told them what I liked. I hung up my coat, set my bag down, washed my face, then sat in the armchair. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the window, falling across a knit throw, one that looked just like the ones I used to make. Not the same, but identical in spirit. I closed my eyes. I wasn't dead. I was just in hibernation. And when spring comes, they'll see I'm no longer a shadow. I once thought I was a stain on Nathan's life. But then, one letter from the past reminded me of who I used to be. Some mornings, when the mist still blanketed the grass at Carlin Reserve, I would sit in the little kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, staring out the window. The world was still then, with only the rustling of dry leaves and the faint footsteps of Mr. Floyd, walking his morning laps around the chess patio. In those early days, I didn't say much. I just did things. Cleaned the kitchen, washed the tablecloths, sat quietly in the little library, reading old periodicals. No one asked. I didn't need praise. Darla was the first to notice. One Thursday morning, as I was placing large books on a shelf, she walked in and said, softly as breath, "Miss Clarice, I want you to think about a community idea, not because you owe anyone anything, but because someone out there needs your light." That sentence brought me back to 1989. There was a time I had led others, not because of title or power, but because I believed in something bigger than myself. A photo of me with Mr. Herbert Carlin during our volunteer days now hung quietly in the Carlin Trust office, a silent testament to that belief. I began talking to those around me. Mr. Floyd shared stories of his time in Germany, driving tanks, losing 2 brothers to the war. Agnes, an elderly woman, had broken her hip last year. She now knitted scarves just to keep her hands from going numb with loneliness. They didn't need lectures. They needed someone to sit beside them, gently touch their hand, and say, "Me too." And so, the Winter Foods for Seniors program was born. I didn't have social media. I wasn't good at planning, but I had feet, and I had a name. I went to the local grocery, run by the son of my old high school classmate, and asked for donations of noodles, rice, powdered milk. I called a woman who used to attend knitting classes at the center, asked if she could help pack care kits. She laughed and said, "It's been ages since someone asked me to do something that mattered." One afternoon, with golden leaves falling like rain, I returned to the center carrying a fabric bag full of donation sign-ups. Darla waited at the door with a pale yellow envelope. She said nothing, just handed it to me. Inside was a handwritten letter, yellowed with age, slanted script. "Clarice is the only person I trust to preserve the true meaning of service. Herbert Carlin." I don't remember how long I sat on the porch, but my eyes were wet, and my heart, after years of weariness, began to beat again to the rhythm of an old belief. After that, I stopped shying away when someone asked for my thoughts. I began suggesting ideas. Instead of simply distributing donated goods, I proposed a winter warmth market, a place where recipients could choose what they needed: a scarf, a jar of apple jam, or a bag of black beans. Ruth, a widow who usually sat silent during knitting classes, volunteered to create colorful signs for each stall. When I asked why, she said, "I used to be a kindergarten teacher, but after my husband died, I thought all my energy was gone. Today, I realized it was just asleep." People started looking at me differently, not with pity, like the first day, and not with judgment, like at Nathan's, but with the eyes of those who had also touched rock bottom, had been blown off course by life's winds, and then saw a steady hand reaching out quietly, without judgment. The winter market took place in early November. The air was chilly, sunlight filtering through golden trees. In the center yard, makeshift stalls were built from wooden frames and old cloth. No fireworks, no booming music, just quiet chatter, softy laughter, and the wind brushing through wool sleeves. Clarice, me, stood at the jam stall. I showed a fellow elder how to seal a jar to keep the glass intact, and how to write labels in bold, black ink for aging eyes. Someone leaned in and said, "You remind me of my mother. She's gone now." I didn't know what to say. I just rested a hand on their shoulder, held a silence long enough to let them know. I understood. Then the local paper arrived. They took pictures, jotted notes, asked questions. At first, I stepped back, wanting Darla to take center stage, but she pulled me forward and said, "Ms. Clarice keeps this place in rhythm. No one else." That evening, after cleanup, I returned to my room, my small wooden space with a window facing the lake. I took off my moss green cardigan, hung it on the old hook by the door, and sat on the bed, fingers brushing the half-knit scarf. My mother used to say, "People never truly break. We just grow moss. And sometimes, all it takes is a gentle hand to wipe it away, and the stone underneath will show again." I realized I didn't need to become who I was before. I just needed to remember who I had been, and that I could still be her in a new way. The next day, as I dropped off the new project proposal at the Carlin Trust office, I noticed something strange. On the left wall, near the receptionist's desk, where old certificates used to hang, there was now a large, newly framed photo. I paused. My heart dipped, then rose with a feeling I couldn't name. In the photo was a line of volunteers behind the kitchen counter, 1989. My hands were covered in flour, hair tied back with a rubber band. And beside me, smiling wearily but warmly, stood Herbert Carlin. I'd forgotten that photo ever existed, but here, it hung like a milestone. Darla appeared with a paper coffee cup in hand, her eyes softer than usual. I found it in the archives while organizing the storage room. Herbert kept so many letters, photos, notes. I thought you should see this one. She handed me a cream-colored envelope with soft gold trim. Herbert's handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted slightly, left, gentle strokes. I sat by the window, hands trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single page. The words were plain, honest, just like him. "If I am no longer here, please give this letter to Clarice Ashford. I have worked with many in my life, but Clarice is the only one I trust to carry the true spirit of service. She doesn't just give. She gives with dignity and deep understanding. Let her lead, even if it's only a small group." I folded the letter and held it in my lap. Outside, sunlight spilled through the leaves. I closed my eyes. I once thought I was just a shadow. No name, no trace. But someone had remembered. Someone had seen me, even though I never stood on a stage, wore a badge, or held a title. That night, in my little wooden room, I turned on the desk lamp. Its soft, yellow light spread across the table and the wall. I pulled out a new notebook, not for a diary, but for plans, for the Carlin Fund Christmas Gala. I didn't want it to be just another fundraiser. I wanted it to be something people would remember, not for the pies or the decorations, but for the way we touched each other, with truth and trust. I'd never studied management, but I knew how to listen, how to seal a jar tight enough to survive winter, how to walk away, even if no one said goodbye. And now I knew something more. I wasn't moss. I was stone. When I returned to my little desk to fold the scarf, I noticed something resting quietly on the wooden surface. A thick red card with embossed snowflake patterns. I opened it. Official invitation. Carlin Fund Christmas Gala, December 22nd. I smiled. Darkness isn't the enemy. It's just the canvas for light. And then, the night of the Christmas Gala arrived. The night I was finally ready to stop being a shadow. Nathan looked up, wine glass in hand, frozen mid-sip. His daughter pointed and asked, "Dad, why is Grandma sitting with the governor?" Nathan looked up, his wine glass frozen mid-air. His daughter pointed and asked, "Dad, why is Grandma sitting with the governor?" I heard the question clearly from the far end of the ballroom, where the crystal lights spilled over the long table draped in white linen, as the murmur of voices swelled around us. Heads turned, Curious eyes scanned my face, comparing it to some distant memory, trying to match it with the silver-haired woman walking calmly in a gray satin dress. The dress wasn't designer, it was rented, but it fit so perfectly, it felt as if it were made just for me. I chose gray because it made me feel balanced, like I didn't have to shout to be seen, or shrink to stay invisible. I could just stand, naturally, as myself. I walked beside Darla, her arm gently linked with mine, in quiet respect. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor, each step a reminder. Every step matters. I didn't scan the room. I didn't need to. I looked ahead, toward the tall Christmas tree, glowing gently near the stage. But I knew my son was there. Of course I did. Both Nathan and Melinda were guests of a bank sponsoring the gala. They had no idea I'd be attending, let alone honored. I heard Melinda gasp. "Oh my God, is that Mrs. Clarice?" Her voice wasn't quiet enough to go unnoticed. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I felt the discomfort roll off their table, like cigarette smoke curling through a sealed room. From the main stage, the microphone crackled to life. The governor of Pennsylvania, who once rode a bus with me during his college days, smiled as he approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we gather not only to celebrate Christmas, but to honor someone who quietly rebuilt the spirit of Carlin at a time when kindness is often underestimated. No one deserves it more than Mrs. Clarice, who has not only given her life to others, but reignited the soul of Carlin." Applause followed, not polite, automatic clapping, but the kind that has a heartbeat. That means something. I stood, no shoulders raised, no head bowed, just a quiet smile. A reporter came over for a few words. I nodded, kept it short. Darla took care of everything else. I let her, and then I heard the patter of small feet. "Grandma!" Lila and Jake, right behind her. They threw their arms around me, their cheeks pressed into the folds of my dress. Jake's tiny hand clutched my hem, his eyes wide. "Grandma, you look like a fairy." I knelt down, held them tight. The scent of kids' shampoo still clung to their hair. There was no distance in those hugs, just warmth and a simple truth. They were still my grandchildren, no matter what the grown-ups thought. I led them back to our table, along rows of crisp white linens. My place was near the stage, beside the board members of the Carlin Fund. My seat had a name card, embossed in gold, Clarice Ashford, guest of honor. Lila pointed. "Grandma, your name is on the table." I nodded, smoothed her hair, just like I'd nodded to myself 3 months ago, when I was still packing up photo boxes in a cold, dark trailer. Darla leaned in and whispered, "Told you, you're the heart of this winter, and probably many more." We sat down as the first course arrived. Butternut squash soup with nutmeg, steaming and fragrant. I wasn't hungry, but I lifted the spoon anyway, as a way to keep in rhythm with the world again. My eyes found Nathan across the room. His face was stiff, frozen like bronze, his hand still resting on the glass he hadn't yet lifted. Melinda leaned in, whispered something to him, but her gaze darted away when she saw mine. I didn't look away, didn't accuse, just looked. Not with anger. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here because I deserved to be. A major donor approached, shook my hand, and said he'd read the article about Mrs. Ashford, the woman who rebuilt a community with jars of jam. I smiled and said, "I simply brought a little patience and an old basket to the market." Not long after, an event staff member came to invite me to speak. I stood. My low-heeled shoes made no sound, but I knew I was walking through the gaze of hundreds. And for the first time, those eyes didn't look past me. On stage, I used no notes. I'd known for a while what I wanted to say. "A few months ago," I began, "I lived in a trailer at the edge of the woods. Some people thought I was a beggar, but I wasn't. I was simply someone who knew how to give." I said nothing more. I looked straight at Nathan, not to accuse, but to let him witness. I stepped down from the stage to applause. Not a standing ovation, just polite hands, and for the first time, recognition. After the speech, I returned to my table. The gala shifted into soft music. Guests mingled, raised glasses, exchanged cards. Warm hands touched my shoulder. A few words of thanks, a few nods. I'd grown used to being part of the blur. So this being seen, still felt unfamiliar. Darla laughed, handed me a fruit mocktail. Feel like dancing? She teased. I shook my head. I just want to sit a while. I chose a quiet corner, beside the gift table, wrapped in silver foil and red bows. My old brown leather bag sat on my lap. A gift from my husband. Our first Christmas after he retired. I opened it, pulled out an old card from the volunteer kitchen, 1989. The edges were yellowed, but the writing was still clear. Thank you, Clarice. No one needs to be perfect to deserve a chance. I looked around. Nathan's table now only had Melinda and the kids. Where was my son? I didn't have to wait long. Leaving the main hall to find the exit, I saw Nathan standing by the door. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, dusting his blazer's shoulders like forgotten ash. He saw me, took one step toward me, then stopped. Mom, I looked him straight in the eye, the same way I had from the stage. Can you come home with us for Christmas? He asked. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because some questions need time for the heart to find the answer on its own. I once lived in a trailer. No living room, no heat. But the coldest thing I ever felt was my own child's indifference. That's what I realized most clearly while sitting in the shared kitchen of Carlin Reserve on Christmas night. The scent of cookies baking filled the air, blending with orange peel and ginger. At the table, Darla was helping Mrs. Bernice hook the last ornaments onto the tree. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, light and soft, just enough to blanket the rooftops and wooden steps. Clarice, Floyd called from the hallway, holding a silver-red gift box. You accept gifts? I smiled. If it's cookies, yes. Floyd chuckled, but handed me the box anyway. Open it. Inside was a small wooden flute, old but polished clean. Engraved near the mouthpiece were the words, "To one who makes music out of silence." Founded at a flea market, he said. Carved that line myself. I figured, you're that kind of person. I didn't play music. I didn't blow into it. I just held it, studying the grain. It wasn't a gift for the ears. It was one for the soul. Dinner began at 7. I was the head cook. Beef stew, cornbread, roasted tomato salad, and a lightly spiced squash soup. But the centerpiece was the sign in the middle of the table. Every dish tells a story. Darla had suggested it the week before. We're not just eating, she said. We're remembering. I stood first. I made this stew for the first time when I was 16, I began, voice steady. My mother told me, if you can make something that makes people go quiet while eating, you've done it right. Light laughter circled the table. I never cooked it for Nathan, I continued. Not because I was angry, but because I was afraid that if he ate it and felt nothing, I'd lose my last piece of her. No one spoke, but the eyes around the table softened. Floyd nodded, resting his hand on the flute. Bernice held Darla's hand. And me. For the first time, I felt at peace, like a soup that's seasoned just right. Not too much, not too little. After dinner, everyone gathered in the common room. A square space with wood-paneled walls and a high ceiling strung with warm lights. Bernice sat at the electric piano in the corner, hands trembling but steady, playing Silent Night with the delight of a child. Others sat in a circle, cocoa in hand, some wrapped in blankets, some just listening. I sat too, wearing my moss-green cardigan, the wooden flute still tucked in my pocket. Darla came over, sat cross-legged like a grandchild. You know, she said quietly, I used to think Clarice Ashford was just a retired woman with a modest legacy. But turns out, you're the best part of what I still believe about kindness. I chuckled softly, then glanced around the room, at people once forgotten, now singing Christmas carols like a humble choir. Just then, Rosie, the little orphan girl staying temporarily while her mom went through rehab, ran up to me. pressed a broken cookie into my hand. "I saved the best piece for you," she said, then dashed off, her hair flying like a wordless thank you. I held the cookie, watching her go, and suddenly I remembered Nathan at her age, curled up in the kitchen, crying, asking, "Mom, is Dad coming back?" I had no answer then, but now I had an answer for myself. Back at my cottage later that night, I found an envelope waiting on the doorstep, no name written on it, but I recognized the handwriting right away. Just 4 words. "Mom, I'm sorry. I understand." I didn't open it, just placed it inside the wooden box, with the old photographs and the Christmas card from 1989. Forgiveness is something I've already made peace with inside, but going back to the way things were, that's no longer something I need. The next morning, Christmas Day, Carlin Reserve lay under a soft layer of snow, like powdered sugar. The tree in the front yard drooped from the weight of the wet snow, but its lights still glowed. In the shared kitchen, people were up earlier than usual, not because they had to, but because they had something to give. Homemade gifts, warm wishes, a folded poem tucked inside a napkin. I sat by the window, holding a printed newspaper in my familiar mug of black coffee. The fireplace hissed softly, filling the air with the scent of burning wood and fresh bread. Floyd knocked, then stepped in, holding a weathered box wrapped in newspaper. "Merry Christmas, Clarice," he said in his gravelly tone. "I think it's time you had this." I opened the box. Inside was a reddish-brown knit sweater, V-neck, the shoulders a bit worn. I froze. "I kept it until I found someone worthy," he said. "The man who gave it to me was a buddy from the service, but I think it belongs now with someone who warms others just by being there." I didn't reply, just folded the sweater gently, laying a hand over it like I was afraid the memories in its threads might break. That afternoon, a few residents gathered outside, playing chess, roasting marshmallows, swapping old stories. I didn't join. I stayed in, took out the wooden flute, and tried playing it for the first time. The sound was off, wobbly, then steady. Not in tune, not perfect, but I played. Not for anyone to hear, but to remind myself I was still alive. When evening fell, Darla stopped by with a bottle of warm spiced cider. She poured me a cup. "Not going to open the letter?" she asked, her voice soft, like she didn't want to break the stillness. I shook my head. "I've forgiven him, but I don't live for him anymore." She didn't ask again. We just sat in silence, watching the snow drift past the window, flakes landing on the frosted glass and disappearing. Christmas night. The small wooden cottage was hushed, lit only by the warm glow of a lamp on the wall, illuminating an old still-life painting. I sat alone, cup of cocoa in hand, steam fogging my glasses. Outside, the sky was filled with stars, and the piano in the common room still played faintly in the distance. "Have yourself a merry little Christmas" sounded like it was being played just for me. I looked at my reflection in the window. Older, quieter, steadier, and I whispered, not for anyone else to hear, but just for me. "I'm still here. I'm still me." 3 months ago, they called me a beggar. Today, my photo hangs on the city's wall of inspiration. I stood behind the red velvet curtain, waiting for my turn to step onto the stage. Glenridge City Hall hadn't hosted such a formal event for seniors in years. White chair covers tied with navy ribbons, gleaming stone floors, and the light scent of early spring tulips in the air. Outside, the snow had melted halfway, patches of sunburnt grass peeking through the ground, as if winter could no longer hold back what was meant to bloom. I adjusted my coat collar, brushed back a few stray hairs. A large photograph, me and Mr. Herbert Carlin at a food drive in 1989, had been placed prominently in the main hall. Darla said they wanted it to symbolize resilience and kindness that doesn't age. I simply smiled. Words like that, I've learned to receive without shrinking. I was no longer the woman who stood silently by the sink while her son toasted someone else with wine. Darla stepped beside me, gave a slight nod. It's your turn, Miss Clarice. I walked out. The applause wasn't loud, but it was steady and genuine, as if no one had to try to show respect. A city official handed me a certificate, gold-edged, my name embossed at the center. Then he passed me the microphone. I looked across the room, familiar faces from craft classes, fellow residents who once shared chicken soup at the Carlin Reserve kitchen, and, in the back row, I saw Nathan. He sat quietly, head slightly bowed, hands clenched on his knees. Lila and Jake sat beside him, red hair bows, ocean blue sweaters, eyes lifted to me with wonder. Both close and unfamiliar. I took a breath and began. Some thought I was a beggar. Some thought I was useless, outdated, old and pitiful. At one point, I believed that too. I paused. The room fell into a silence that swallowed every word. But then I learned this. Old age isn't the time to disappear. It's the time to bloom, in your own way.
A soft murmur passed through the rows. I looked straight at my son, not in anger or blame, but simply as a mother, standing tall, no longer bowed. Thank you for letting me live through a long enough winter to understand this. Life doesn't end when others stop needing you. It begins again, if you still choose to plant something new. I bowed gently. This time, the applause grew. Someone stood. Maybe they weren't clapping for an old woman. Maybe they were clapping for something inside themselves that just woke up. After the ceremony, I walked slowly out of the hall. The wind grazed my collar, sharp enough to shiver, but not to hurt. I was used to the cold, both the weather and the kind that comes from people. But today, what I felt was a quiet kind of warmth. Darla walked beside me, silent until we reached the main lobby. You did it, Miss Clarice, she said, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. I looked around. The same people who once saw me as a shadow now nodded in greeting. Some shook my hand. Others just looked on with what might have been guilt. But I didn't need apologies. I didn't need explanations. Because I knew my worth no longer depended on their eyes. Nathan stood in the hallway, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a worn leather notebook. I recognized it instantly, the one I used to scribble little notes about life, about teaching, about motherhood, even old, clumsy poems no one had ever read. I didn't know when he'd found it, but when our eyes met, I knew. He'd read it. Nathan took a slow step forward, his face no longer defensive or ashamed, just a son, seeing his mother for the first time, without the filter of guilt or pride. Mom, he said, barely above a whisper, would you come back with us this weekend, just so the kids can be around you more? I looked at him. A part of me wanted to embrace him, like I used to when he fell and looked up, waiting to be forgiven. But the part of me that had learned to stand on her own just nodded gently. I'll think about it, Nathan, I said, then turned to hug Lila and Jake as they ran to me, two bright little lights beaming up from the sidewalk. Grandma, you were amazing, Lila whispered, her hair smelling of soap. You looked like a movie hero, Jake exclaimed, eyes glowing. I bent to their level. You don't need a stage to know who you are, sweetheart. You just need belief, from inside. They nodded, like I'd just told them a spell. Then I stood. Nathan remained under the barren tree, leather notebook in hand. He didn't move closer, didn't call out, but when I glanced back, he gave a small nod. I nodded too, slower, not cold, not heavy, just enough for both of us to understand. What needed forgiving had been forgiven. What couldn't be restored, let it rest. That afternoon, I returned to Carlin Reserve. Darla was baking raisin cookies. Floyd sat by the window, reading the paper. I hung up my coat, made myself a mug of hot cocoa, unsweetened. Floyd always said, at our age, too much sweet, and you forget what life really tastes like. I settled into my familiar wicker chair, facing the large window. Outside, the January sky had cleared. The gray clouds had drifted to the edge of the horizon, leaving soft blue like chiffon above the trees. I took a sip, rested my hand on my lap, slow, steady. And I knew I was no fairy godmother, no wand, no miracles. No one came to save me. I was just an old woman, once hurt, once forgotten, once called a beggar. And today, I sat with my name etched on a plaque of honor, not because someone gave it to me, but because I refused to give up on myself. They may still look at me with surprise. They may still whisper. They may feel regret or not. But I no longer look for validation in their eyes, because I know who I am. I didn't disappear. I simply bloomed on the very ground they thought I wouldn't survive. 3 months ago, I left in silence, empty hands and an emptier heart. Today, those same hands have sown hope, again for those the world nearly forgot. I used to believe that love meant giving without condition. But in the end, I learned this. If you don't honor yourself, even your closest can turn away. Like an old coat that once kept the whole house warm. When the cold passes, some won't hesitate to toss it on the porch without a second thought. If this story reminds you of someone who once quietly gave everything for their family, call them, or simply give them a hug. Because sometimes that's all it takes to keep a heart from going cold.